So every election, we not only vote on who's going to be our next president, but we also vote props that we want to pass and props that we do not want to pass. And one particular prop that have been brought up this past election was the death penalty. In times when I think of the death penalty, I think to myself, is it really an action or is it merely a scare tactic? Year after year, countless inmates are waiting for their execution, and year after year, those executions are not carried out. Which brings me to my proposition of California needs to speed up the death penalty. My first reason for California needing to speed up the death penalty because the cost of housing an inmate on death row is more cost than housing an inmate for life. The Death Penalty Information Center proves that since 1978, housing inmates on death row has cost California roughly $1 billion. And the cost of housing an inmate per year on death row has increased roughly from 2007 to before 2007 to $34,150 to after 2007 to $64,000. Not only is it costing the state of California money to house death row inmates, but it's also costing taxpayers, such as most of us, including me, $90,000 per year to house an inmate on death row compared to an inmate serving a regular life prison sentence. My second claim is that inmates are kept on death row for too long, which proves inmates are not in fear of being executed. The average death penalty info also states that the average time spent on death row is 17.5 years. So that means even when sentenced to death, they're most likely of their death sentence coming through is not until 18 years after they are sentenced. The current longest inmate on death row his name is Douglas Stankiewicz, and he has been on death row since 1978 for the murder of a 22-year-old female. Mary Slauson, author of the 2012 articles Reuters, interviewed Stankiewicz, and he feels that he's confident that his death sentence will never be carried out. Stankiewicz said he is confident that his death penalty will not be carried out because he feels the death penalty is a joke and the system is, as he quotes, messed up. So if we just go back to my first claim and talk about the math, just do a little math on Stankiewicz's inmate sentence. So for the first 29 years he's been in prison, the cost of housing an inmate was $34,150. Times that by 29, that comes out to roughly $990,000. And then after 2007, when it was increased to $64,000, times that by 10 years, that's $640,000. And then you take into consideration the amount of money the taxpayers have paid for the last 40 years, which is about $3.6 million. So add that all together, him alone has cost California roughly $5.3 million in keeping him on death row instead of executing him. The number of inmates on death row has increased tremendously due to the lengthy time of the death row sentence. Paige St. John of the LA Times states that currently 747 inmates are on death row waiting execution, which also states that the average prisoner on death row at the age that they are sentenced is 49 years old. So for example, if a person at 21 commits a crime and they are sentenced to death, that means that the average time they will be executed is at age 49. So they will have to spend 28 years in prison before they are executed. My third claim is California prisons are becoming overcrowded and short of resources due to the increasing number of death row inmates. PPIC.org states that since 2015, prison population has reached 112,300, with 2,816 of those inmates currently having a life sentence, with 747 that are currently awaiting to be executed. And this number, the 112,300, is about 35.8% above maximum capacity. Prison population over the age of 50 has increased from 4% to 21% since between 1990 and 2013. This has brought the attention of greater health needs, and California is struggling to maintain adequate health care costs. California also has to rely on out-of-state prisons. Currently in California, there are 8,800 inmates in the California prison system that are being held in facilities located in states such as Alabama and Mississippi, because we as California are not able to house all these inmates because of the huge number of death row inmates we currently have. So in conclusion, California needs to take into consideration unnecessary costs and mental anguish of inmates currently on death row. Without the right system, there is no justice. If inmates see holes in the system, will they ever feel justice will be served? The same question the family of that 22-year-old female who was murdered by Douglas Stankiewicz in 1978 has been asking themselves for the past 40 years. Thank you.
All right, Jacob, the controversy on the death penalty is straightforward. I do think that sometimes the controversy is about value arguments. You've got an argument here that is really kind of based on an economic need, and that's okay, but I think you need to be focused on that economic need. Your general proposition is that California needs to speed up the death penalty. I think the argument that you mostly make, though, is that by the slow pace of the death penalty, it causes us to spend excessively or waste a large amount of money. And so I think maybe that would be a way to refocus your claim a little bit and avoid maybe some of the other issues that are not relevant to claims of fact. There's not really a preview of what the supporting structure is going to be at the beginning of the speech. In the body of the speech, I couldn't catch an organizational point except that there's a high cost that we're dealing with. And then there are a couple of other places where you do start to cite what the structure is, but it needs to be a little bit clearer. Like on the second point, it sounds like there's a deterrence issue here. The inmates don't fear the death penalty. There's no impact that it has. That's a slightly different argument. It doesn't really get developed very much here, except that you've got the one example of the guy who's on death row who doesn't fear it. But what's the consequence of that, except that you kind of have that moral outrage that you have at the end, which gets us back into the value issue. Most of your argument consists of the cost comparisons that are going on. And there are a lot of people who would take the exact information that you gave us and say, that shows why we don't want to have a death penalty. Instead of putting them in at $90,000 a year on death row and never executing them, if we got rid of the death penalty, we could keep those people in jail for $60,000 or $64,000 a year, and it would save us money. Plus the costs of prosecuting people for death capital cases is, there's costs involved in that, and that never becomes part of the argument, and I think that might be something that the respondent will probably be talking about when they're doing these cost comparisons. The other thing, of course, is that you yourself acknowledge that we're only talking, I shouldn't say only, it's a lot of bad people there. You've got almost 800 people, 747 people who are on death row. Out of the 112,000 people in California who are in prisons, that's less than 1%. So how big an impact that would make on our total costs, I think, is a little bit problematic. And again, like I said, people who oppose the death penalty frequently point to those costs and say, well, that's the reason that we shouldn't have the death penalty in the first place, because it causes everything to be more expensive. If we just sentence them to life, we would have average expenses instead of these excessive expenses. I do think there are some arguments to be made about the issues of health care. It's so strange that we have to spend a lot of money on health care for people on death row. If that's the case, well, there's certainly a value and moral argument to be made there, but it's definitely one of those things that needs some data on it to show us that that is the case. Have we... Excuse me. Oh, thank you. And remember, only two of those. 2 Gesundheits. After that, I have to get well on my own. Otherwise, it's just, you're pandering to people. But the we're back to the same issue. It's a relatively small part of the population. If there was some way to demonstrate that that's the thing that's causing us, an excessive amount of healthcare issues in the prisons, I think that would be helpful. Toward the end of the speech, you do start diverting to some arguments concerning value arguments, and I think that that's a little bit problematic. I would think one of the things that's missing here is an explanation about why is it takes us so long to execute prisoners. Why is it 17 and a half years? Why is it the average age of somebody who's executed is 49 and that some of these people are going to be waiting 28 years? I got no explanation about why that's happening, and so I would never have any idea about how we could change any of those things, and I think we need more data on that for your argument to be clearer as well. All right, thank you very much.